So the CEH scanning methodology. You're going to check for live systems, check for open ports, scanning beyond the IDS, banner grabbing, scan for vulnerabilities, draw network diagrams, prepare proxies, and then scanning pen testing. So checking for live systems, ICMP scanning. So on LANs, this will work. On the WANs, this won't work. On the border networks, the egress points outside of that structure, outside of the LAN, ICMP is almost always blocked. But on the inside of the network, it's wide open. So it'll work very well on the inside of the network, but not as well on the outside. Most of the communication will be blocked. So there are certain services and things that you can ping, and then there's most of the egress, ingress points you won't be able to ping. So some of them you may be able to, some of them you won't. But in general, it works better on the LAN versus the WAN. Everything on the LAN should answer. So this scan is useful for locating active devices, for determining if ICMP is passing through a firewall. So you want to see if your ICMP will pass through a firewall. Most of the time it will not. So it's not good for it to pass through there. So you send an echo request and you get an echo reply. That's how a ping works. Hey, hey, there's your reply, right? So you say hey, he says hey, and that's it. That's kind of how it works. So echo request, echo reply. The ping scan output using Nmap. So here's some output data from a graphical tool. Nmap is usually command line based, so most of the time you'll just be using the command line. So performing a ping sweep. What is a ping sweep? A ping sweep is used to determine the live host from a range of IP addresses by sending an ICMP echo request to multiple hosts. If a host is live, it will return an echo reply. So attackers calculate subnet mask using subnet mask calculators to identify the number of hosts present in the network. So I take how many answers I got and I go plug it into a calculator, and I can see approximately how big the network is going to be, or at least it's going to be this big. So attackers then use ping sweeps to create inventory of live systems in the subnet. So then I sweep the whole entire subnet. And basically what that means is you just ping every single address in the subnet and then catalog which ones replied, which hosts are alive. Again, this used to be very useful, but today not all systems will answer. The protection devices like IDS, things like that, they won't answer. Bridging devices may or may not answer. Ping sweep tools, Angry IP Scanner, you need to know that one for the test. SolarWinds Engineer tool sets, ping sweep. Okay, that may be on the test, so remember that one. It sounds familiar. Here's a whole bunch more tools you can use. You can just use the command prompt as well with a for loop and Python or something like that. Python's a great tool. If you're gonna be a programmer, you will definitely come across Python. If you're not going to be a programmer in your career path from wherever this takes you, you want to make sure that you spend some time learning Python. You will need it for penetration testing. So the scanning methodology, check for open ports. So we did the ping. We used ping for checking for live systems. Now there's also TCP pingers and stuff like that, which we'll talk about later. But so when you're checking for live systems, we're going to use ICMP and TCP pings. And then check for open ports, we're going to use SSDP scanning. The Simple Service Discovery Protocol, SSDP, Simple Service Discovery Protocol, works in conjunction with the UPnP to detect the plug-and-play devices available in a network. So vulnerabilities in UPnP may allow attackers to launch buffer overflow and DOS attacks. Attackers may use UPnP, SSDP, mSearch information discovery tool to check if the machine is vulnerable to UPnP exploits or not. So this is one tool. Scanning in IPv6 networks. So we know that we've exhausted IPv4. All of the addresses were officially exhausted in the US in, I think, October of 15. So IPv6 is now going to come into play. So you need to be familiar with it and understand its strengths and weaknesses, just like we do for IPv4. So IPv6 increases the IP addresses from 32 bits to 128 bits. Huge difference to support more levels of addressing hierarchy. Traditional network scanning techniques will be computationally less feasible due to larger search spaces. So for example, if I have a subnet with IPv64, there are certain guidelines, right? So the guideline tells you just take, instead of taking 255 addresses for a typical network like we used to do, Class C, we'll just take about 1,000,000 addresses, right? Every network has 1,000,000 addresses. So they're saying that it's infeasible to practically scan 1,000,000 addresses, although our computers are pretty fast. People try and do it all the time. I see the scans all the time. So it's not as feasible, but for LAN scanning it is. But for if you bought a subnet, an IPv6 subnet, you may have a huge block of addresses. So scanning that huge block is probably impractical, and if you do, then you're certainly going to raise some alarms. So they may do it in a low volume or something like that. So just keep that in mind, that people will scan the space. It's going to happen. They have to do it. It's irresistible not to do it. So scanning an IPv6 network is more difficult and complex than the IPv4, and some scanning tools do not support ping sweeps on IPv networks. So some of the newer ones do. Attackers need to harvest IPv6 addresses from network traffic, recorded logs, or received from the other header lines and archived email, Usenet messages, etc. So what they try to do is they try to build a list of addresses that are in use versus trying to ping them all and find them, because the space is just massive. It's huge. So scanning IPv6 networks, however, offer a large number of hosts in a subnet. If an attacker can compromise one host in a subnet, the attacker can profile all hosts using a multicast address. So then you can go through and figure out what hosts are live on that network, which ones are being used, based on the network gear that's set up to talk to them.